Okay. Hi, Dimitri. Hi there. Nice to be here. In today's talk, we will dive into the undepths of Russian disinformation, Russian myths, and Russian narratives, as you already did the whole day. But we have a special guest. That's Stephen Douglas. He was a diplomat in Donbas from 2012 to 2022, and he was there for the OSCE and experienced a lot of stuff that happened there. But it was not only this fault line of narratives he was working at. He also did some work in Northern Ireland, where he was with the Alliance Party for Northern Ireland for some time, so we can say that he managed to get by in two of the most difficult diplomatic regions of Europe. Some opening words. So today, as I take from the program, you heard a lot of stuff about disinformation, about propaganda, about historical facts that are distorted or which are quite, or which are used for Russian propaganda or for propaganda. But Stephen will take us even more in the past and will take us even more to the roots of the problems we have with propaganda, because we have to understand that we all live with narratives and myths that surround us. We grow up with them. We are used to listen to fairy tales. We are used to listen to what our grandparents, parents tell us, and there is some knowledge and some mythological basis we all live with, and this basis is already used for propaganda because it's really easy to use it because everyone of us has it ready. So we just have to trigger those points, and our unconscious experience with which we grew up since childhood will automatically fall into line with those myths and narratives. But first of all, I would like to start with you, Stephen. Can you tell us a little bit about your job in Donbas, about Minsk and its consequences, and how you experienced them for yourselves?
Hi, Martin. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So, Martin, I worked in eastern Ukraine between February 2015 and really February 2022. But the most interesting part from our perspective here was when I worked in Stanitsa Luhanska, which is part of eastern Ukraine, where the only official crossing point between government-controlled Luhansk and Russia-occupied Luhansk took place. And I worked there helping to facilitate the safe passage of around 10,000 Ukrainians every day in that particular part of eastern Ukraine. And that's where my idea called Disinfoklore was born, actually, on this bridge in a forest where access to Russia-occupied Luhansk was controlled by Russian soldiers occupying a military position on a bridge in a forest where basically they were trying to create this, what I call a rebel troll kingdom, which was Russia-occupied Luhansk between 2014 and 2022.
So what was your actually daily job there? So you had to control if the Minsk agreements or the Minsk Accords are properly observed, or did you have to check just the violations, or what was your actually job there?
So mainly our job was to make sure that there was a safe passage for people going between these two areas, Russia-occupied Luhansk and the rest of Luhansk. But Minsk, the Minsk agreements were also a very important part of this. So every morning I would go to the positions, the Russian occupying position and also the Ukrainian position, and ask them what had happened the night before. And they would give me, tell me stories about what had happened the night before in terms of artillery exchange and fire between the Russian occupiers and the Ukrainian defenders. So I would then list what had happened according to the accounts given to me, and I would make reports of those to the people that I worked for in Kyiv, who in turn worked for people in Vienna, where our headquarters was.
Okay, so, but did you have any power to interfere if something went wrong, or did you have any legal authority to intervene when somebody was misconducting, or did you just monitor the situation there?
We just monitored the situation there, so there was no authority to intervene. Of course, this was Ukrainian sovereign territory. So, but the fiction which my mission was established, because my mission had Russians in it as well as Ukrainians, was that in some sense what was a Russian occupation, a military occupation, was in some sense not quite anything to do with Russia, so it was kind of a weird hybrid organization that I worked for, where everyone knew it was Russia which had occupied parts of Ukraine, but we had Russians working with us in the organization who would have disputed that.
Okay. So I can relate somehow how you felt, because every time I spent a lot of time in the Balkans, and every time a policeman came up to me, it was like, okay, what's up now? So you didn't know, did he want to ask you some silly question, or did you really want to get your money, or somehow bully you around? So I can guess that the situation there was quite the same. So every day you went to your post, was it with some bad feeling, or did you expect that something would go wrong, or what was the usual daily experience, how the Russian and Ukrainian personnel there behaved? So was there a difference, or?
No, it wasn't a huge feeling of fear going there each day. It became quite normal, as we find in quite peculiar situations. We become used to situations quite quickly. So it became quite normal to spend a bit of time speaking to the Ukrainian. They were border guards, but armed, who had been there protecting the night before, and talking to them about how they had experienced the night before, and then going to speak to the Russian occupiers on the other side of the bridge. That always did feel a little bit weird, because they were occupiers and they shouldn't have been there, and they were always trying to spin stories about what they had done and why they were there, and that's partly what made me, what gave me the idea for Disinfoklore, was from having these conversations each day with the Russian occupiers and the Ukrainians on the other side about what had happened the night for what fights, what violence they had experienced.
And was it some event that triggered this? That triggered this experience where I said, okay, now I'm gonna make Decoding Trolls. Now I have the idea for Disinfoklore. Was it a gradual, how do I say? It's late. Was it a gradual process? So you started to think that something is off, and it got more and more off, and then you actually realized that there is a system behind it, even if a very weird one.
Yes, I experienced from early 2015 there. I was very curious about why the media space in Russian occupied part of Ukraine was full of stories about things which had never happened and were fantastic events, about stories about thousands of Polish mercenaries across the river waiting to attack, and every day there was just a vast amount of what just seemed like nonsense stories that I would hear there. And this was before there was Brexit or Donald Trump. So it was relatively unusual to experience a media space with so many ridiculous stories. So I didn't really understand what these stories were about, but I knew something was quite weird was going on, and that there was some system behind this, because I could notice patterns. There was a lot of stories that gave people the idea that they were being threatened by Ukrainians. So in the Russian occupied part of Ukraine, the media space, the Disinfoklore apparatus was trying to create a sense of fear in the people living in Russia-occupied Ukraine, and this was being done through these stories. So I didn't really understand why they were doing it, but I could understand that something strange was going on, and so I spent a lot of time collecting these stories and trying to interpret and to understand what was going on. So that was kind of how Decoding Trolls was born.
So I guess it was quite weird when you walked into a small town and asked them if 10,000 Poles are somewhere around there. Or was it, I mean, it was clear from the beginning that you won't find 10,000 Poles lingering around in the woods around this bridge, I think.
Absolutely, but today we hear similar stories by the border with Ukraine's border with Poland. So Russian propaganda is broadcasting precisely the same kinds of stories. Now, in relation to Poland and Ukraine up at the border, as they were in 2015, these similar kind of pattern, these similar stories. And I think what is going on, what they're really trying to do is create in the minds of people this sense of a threat that NATO forces are going to attack Russia, and therefore Russia has the license to attack first. It's kind of a weird, it's a very weird reality which they create, but it's exactly the same pattern that Russia was doing in eastern Ukraine in 2015, 2014, as they're now doing about, for instance, French troops coming to the possibility coming to Ukraine.
So I guess you came into contact with the local population. So what did they make out of this whole mess of this whole contradicting stories? They talk to their relatives on the Russian occupied territory. They talk to their relatives in Russia, because we know many Ukrainians also have relatives in Russia, and vice versa. So did the population there make out of this whole mess? So did they see through this whole propaganda, this whole thing?
Most people stuck inside it probably didn't really understand what was happening. Maybe even to this day they didn't understand what was happening, who was to blame or who was at fault. But they had particular challenges in their own lives, elderly parents, or they perhaps left their business in the occupied part of Ukraine, or their children had to finish their schooling for them to get their proper university entrance. So there was all sorts of reasons why people in the area there needed to go backwards and forwards between the occupation and the rest of Ukraine. So as with everywhere, people just trying to make ends meet and continue their lives the way they hoped they could always continue them, by meeting their parents or helping in the summer with stuff in the garden. But life was made very difficult by having this bridge and this controlled access between two parts of Ukraine.
So let's get a little bit more into your own theories. So Stephen has created a really fascinating set of of analysis tools. You may know his Twitter or X page, where he is called Decoding Trolls. So if you don't follow him, I really highly recommend it. The second one is Power of Mana, or Mana. And the third one is the concept of Disinfoklore. And of course, all of them are Decoding Trolls. So let's start with the first thing. We talked a lot about trolls now, and I think if we talk about trolls, most people here understand that in the case, even the mythological troll or the internet troll. But what is a troll in your case? What makes a troll in your theory?
So any emotion, moving activity of body, speech, and mind is a troll. So in my my conception of troll, my understanding of whether this word troll, which is about movement in a kind of a certain kind of fishing, you let the bait troll along on the top of the surface of the water, and maybe a fish will come along and capture it. Or in certain kinds of folk tales, trolls just suddenly appear out of nowhere, in the same way as when you're reading an article about, say, Ukraine or the information space, you suddenly feel your emotions being stirred, and that's often the first sign we have of when we're being trolled. So I'm very interested in the idea. I use the unit of measurement is a troll, which can be the person who is creating this particular emotion moving meme, or it can be actually the meme itself can be the troll. So that's also quite interesting, that the ownership of the troll passes between, sometimes depends on who is creating it or who is passing it. So it's a passing around of emotions, really. is how I look at trolling.
So what would be one of the all-time favorite Russian trolls you made out?
Wow. I think don't poke the bear is a perfect Russian troll, because it's got the folkloric aspect to it about bears in the forest. It's passed between very important people as a form of wisdom. People in President Biden's circles talk about not poking the bear, and it actually serves Russian foreign policy quite well, because most of their military strategy is about trying to deter a response to their activities, to their aggressive activity. And if they are passing this meme into people's minds that don't poke the bear, i.e., if you respond to us, our provocation, then you'll be provoking us, and it's getting people locked into this crazy hall of mirrors, like an Alice in Wonderland situation, where people are wondering who's provoking whom. And I used to come across this a lot in my time on the bridge in eastern Ukraine. And it's the same structure as our leaders are coming across now, where Russia says if France sends troops to Ukraine, Russia will consider this to be a provocation, and then it comes up with some threat against us to try and stop us sending troops to help Ukraine. But really what it is this idea of a troll lodged into people's minds, that if they respond to Russia's aggressive activities, then Russia will feel it has the right to be aggressive back. And so this counter troll is very effective on a interpersonal level. When I met people on the bridge in eastern Ukraine, but I also see it in terms of many of our world leaders responding to these threats by self-deterring, not helping Ukraine in a way that they could, because they're afraid of what Russia's response will be.
So, and the main thing, I think, the don't poke the bear picture is very good, and it's a really old one. So I think even back when people knew that it's not a good idea to go into the cave and slaughter the bear alone. So you need to have a lot of friends and some tactics and so on to get to this bear. But it's not the only troll that lodges in our mind. And I mean, you have some recent examples, but one of your main fears is that and that's what I was trying to say in my introduction, is that there are very, very culturally old trolls lodging in our minds. So we know each people around there wants to give itself a master narrative. Where are we coming from? Why do we belong here? Why do we belong at this exact spot on the world? And so on and so on. So I think it's a deeply human thing to try to make sense of your surroundings and to fill your life with myth and history. So the further back, the better. And your theory goes even really to the core of European history. And in your theory, I think there are some things that are recurring themes or trolls in our minds since way back in time. Maybe you can explain that a little bit more.
Well, there's because we speak an Indo-European language, there, which if you can understand these words, you do well, then we have the same associations between meanings and signifiers and words across all of our cultures. And so it seems that certain words can be used by, for instance, Russian and other kinds of propagandists to try and hack our consent and our conscious idea of why we are feeling in the particular ways that we are feeling. And so one of these ideas that I noticed is what I call mana, which is energy, which is this idea that when we're passing emotions between ourselves through trolling, through exchanging memes on Twitter or on Instagram, that really what we're doing is we're passing around a negative or a positive energy. And if we can just more slowly assess whether this energy is positive or negative, then this will help us confront a problem of negative trolling in our information space, whether it's things that make us feel a bit frightened or scared about related to the war in Ukraine, or just in other parts of our life, where when we're looking at this stuff in the information space, it's having a negative impact on our happiness. And I'd like us to try and help people, all of us, pay more attention to what goes on after we see these, what I call trolls, and become, if we become sad by seeing things, maybe someone's trying to manipulate our particular minds, so that, for instance, we feel that Ukraine has no chance of winning the war, so that we don't donate money to help people there. And so if we feel this sense of manipulation going on in our own minds, then perhaps this is being done deliberately. And if we're aware this might happen, then perhaps we can do better at resisting these kinds of manipulation.
That's something like, I think what we are seeing now. You already said it, this there is no sense in supporting Ukraine because it has already lost, and I mean that's a troll that's there since 2014 or latest since 2022. And right now we see this uptick of Russian offensive is coming, everything is lost, nothing will, there is nothing to save. And I think if I look at my Twitter bubble, it really has effect. So a lot of people are getting more negative, and you have all these articles that are describing the completely, how do you say that, the completely, the very bad situation of Ukraine, and it's just senseless to write against it, or it's not senseless. I mean, we all do it, but I see that it really taking over people who actually start to get more and more negative over time. That's, of course, Ukraine has less obvious successes, even there are very big ones like the opening of the grain corridor and so on, and all the successes in the Black Sea, but there are some are phasing out of that, and that's a very powerful troll, in your words, that's actually roaming around and making a stampede through our minds right now. And you propose a way out there, and that is, if I get it right, the code of positive trolls. So you actually have a 6-step idea, or 6 steps or 6 points that you check trolls for, and if those 6 points apply, they're a positive troll, or they're a negative troll. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Basically, the problem which we often have is recognizing what's the difference between disinformation and misinformation, because people often think that the same unit of information, if I'm deliberately misleading you, then it's misinformation. But then if you hear something from me and then you repeat it to someone else, that is not a deliberate attempt to mislead, but that's misinformation. But really, at the end of the day, if it's the same worrying piece of information, for instance, that Russia is threatening to bomb us with a nuclear weapon, then it doesn't matter whether you or someone else is deliberately trying to mislead. And so what I wanted to try and find a way was to determine whether this is positive or negative, independent of who is the author of the message. And this is where this code, what I call the Code of Positive Trolls, which is really a toolbox that we can use with 6 elements in it to try and work out if this particular manipulation which is going on is positive or negative, because that's all we need to know. And so, for instance, if the troll is about, say, let's use this example again, because it's always Russia keeps on using the same thing, threatening nuclear annihilation, that if the French army enters Ukraine, Russia will retaliate with nuclear weapons. And if we think, is this a good thing? I mean, it's pretty obvious it's not, because I mean, you know, why would you respond with weapons if French troop is just nuts? It's it goes in unless you got really bad. So you would use my Code of Positive Troll to go through this these activities and think, oh, is this a positive thing or a negative thing? And there's 6 criteria. 1, is it generous? 2, is it ethically disciplined? So a lot of the things we hear say about migrants isn't very ethically disciplined, because it's not in accordance with the Refugee Convention or with international law. Is it a patient? Is it patient reaction? And is it focused, and is it insightful? So we can think about whether it's a government policy or any troll we read online, and try and think through this algorithm to think, oh, is this positive or is this negative? Because all we want to do is try to get rid of the negative things and ignore those. And this is perhaps one way of determining this quite quickly.
So maybe you want to walk us through one example. Maybe you take the nuclear threats, because French troops are totally coming, and then the world will be annihilated because we hate your stuff. So if we would talk to each other and you wouldn't know me, how would you scan through this information?
Well, firstly, knowing that this has already happened before, so this is a constant pattern. So that's really important to know that, so that we have some memory of that this always occurs. And again, this is this idea of trolls recurring again and again. So it's not in a vacuum. that we're hearing the threats again. But the moment we feel fear engaged, and many people are feared, they get frightened when they hear about this, say the nuclear threat. That's the moment we're looking for, and which I'm trying to help myself recognize in real time when my emotions are being engaged by something in the information space, whether it's President Biden saying something, or a meme, or Putin, or something. And once I have that feeling of my emotions being engaged, then I want to try and work out, well, am I being put into a negative or into a positive state of mind? And to try and slow down, make sure that my emotions aren't being manipulated so fast that I don't realize before I know it. I've gone from a feeling of empathy for, say, migrants or refugees to a feeling of, oh, they're going to take my job away or my community away. So I'm trying to help us see that these ways that manipulators use to change our minds into being negative towards, for instance, migrants, we can try and resist them if we know that they're coming. And so the Code of Positive Trolls is a way of helping us look out for these manipulations and respond in a positive way quickly to them.
So actually, what do you think are the main things you need to parse through misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, or trolls? So, because I think most often in our societies, and when it comes to Ukraine or other parts of the world, people actually don't know very much about these regions. So, for example, in Germany or in Austria, and I think the same is in Ireland or Great Britain, many people started with zero knowledge about Ukraine other than it's a former Soviet country that's corrupt and where some things are not going as they should. And basically they're all Russians, but in a different state right now. So, and if Russian propaganda is building heavily on that, so how do you, I mean, we all are fighting we all are working from lower ground to higher ground, because Russia just has planted a lot of trolls in Soviet times already, which can be readily reactivated and fed on, and many people just got sucked into the Russian information space before the war, so with COVID-19 and so on. How do you think Decoding Trolls and Disinfoklore can help to level the playing ground a little bit?
Well, I think simply looking for when we are having our emotions manipulated almost everywhere, in almost every communication, is quite helpful, I think, because some of us, it's hard to always remember that we, whenever we're hearing stories, no matter how natural they sound, that somebody may be telling us that story to manipulate our emotions with a view to changing our outlook or our way of voting, or our response to, for instance, migrants or a migrant crisis, or a particular problem, and that was social problem that we see around. So I think that these are the most obvious places that I see where, in our information space, whether we're in Germany or in Ireland or in America, this idea of border, the struggle between outsiders and insiders and migrants. It's a similar structure which has arisen suddenly everywhere, and so it tells me that something is going on. I don't quite know who is arranging things in this way, or who is making sure that we're all thinking about whether it's the European Parliament election in Austria or in Malta, that the subject matter is about migrants, migration. But I think by pointing out to people that this, I can't really explain how it is, that this structure is everywhere at the moment in terms of the outer realm, migrants coming in to steal quite prosperous countries' sovereignty, security, and fertility. And it doesn't matter how rich the community is, they're still susceptible to feeling threatened by migrants, whether in America they're Mexicans, or here they could be Ukrainians, or whichever, the bogeymen. So I'm trying to help us spot these similarities in our information space, because they are quite common everywhere. And there's a few little tricks that I use to help me avoid being manipulated. So I try also to share those and develop more as we see more cutting edge information warfare campaigns. But we do see the same ones again and again with the Russian ones. They are like trolls popping up.
Hello, hello from the room. Is a question okay?
Yeah, of course. Please.
Hi.
We will. Otherwise, we ramble on until midnight. So just go.
No, hi, Martin. Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for coming. You were talking about trolls, about the attack of creating kind of social images, attacking fear, raising emotions, etc. And when we are talking about the migrant crisis, I think what we are seeing here might have a connection to the whole theme of a culture war. That what we are actually seeing is a Russian pattern of trying to attack the very identity of individuals, of nations or social subgroups. I think that might be a common denominator. And I think if we go back to Donbas, in 1991, 1989, the minor protests in Donbas were directed against Russia for separatism from Russia for independence of Ukraine. And so basically the Donbas was a breeding ground from getting rid of Russian oppression, essentially. So what you're describing, what happened there, the intimidation, the creation of fear towards the West, might have been eventually a punishment or a way of Russia to relativate that existent historical fact by creating narrative, by creating fear, emotions, and stealing and addressing people's identity. What do you think? Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, makes a lot of sense. We know the Russians have this toolbox, which I don't think any of us could have understood how diabolical it was and how they'll dip into it. And now I see what they were doing in Donbas was brainwashing the people living in Russia-occupied Luhansk and preparing them to participate in the meat assaults, which we've seen and continue to see at the moment, where the Russian armed forces use this tactic of putting human waves to draw fire from the Ukrainian forces and try and absorb all of their immediate responses, and to create in the minds of Ukrainians in the Donbas and in Russia-occupied Ukraine this sense of otherness has taken this massive Disinfoklore apparatus to do it, and maybe I don't know if there is this sense of punishment, which maybe is implicit in your question as well. I'm kind of Russia blaming, punishing Ukrainians for their resistance, as you point out, during the minor strikes. I suspect not. I think the system, they just want to punish. They'll punish anyone using the same tools, and basically they don't mind who's punishing Ukrainians, whether it's the Russian occupiers or Ukrainians shooting the Ukrainians from the Russian perspective. It doesn't seem to matter to them. So so I don't know whether it's the divine punishment for them. I don't know whether the Russians are that organized, but it certainly looks like something like that. Karma has come to visit. I'll leave it at that.
So one thing that really interests me, we're always talking about Russian trolls and propaganda trolls that pop up in our mind, or that are reinvigorated, that are resurfacing. But do we ourselves create negative trolls for us when we think about Ukraine, when we talk about Ukraine, when we engage with Russian propaganda? So I think most of us are aware of, or a lot of us who are talking right now and who are at this Zukunftsforum, but do we ourselves tap or trip into the trap sometimes that we ourselves create negative trolls for our work, for our everyday life, for our activities around countering Russian propaganda? And that's something that's not often made a topic of discussions, because we actually believe that we approve of such things, but I don't think we are. So how do we make out our own trolls we are creating?
Yeah, I think this is why we maybe partly another reason why a code of positive trolls is quite useful. So I have in there patience. We should be positively manifesting patience in our what we're doing. We should be not impatient, not losing hope. And there's many positive ways we can ensure that our positive energy is what we manifest, not a negative way. So I think that's a very very important to remember these things, Martin, and that's very much as part of what I would like to remind myself to always remember. To be the fourth is joyous perseverance, but I'm actually kind of I think that's more about energy, but and mana now is more what I'm looking at. But joyous perseverance is a really key element, which is which is what we have to joyously persevere through reading these terrible things, to try and come up with different ways of engaging with the content. So I think obviously what Ukrainians are going through is nothing compared to what we're going through. So engaged in mere mimetic warfare, but hopefully the code of positive trolls can help us maintain positive positive demeanor.
If I may jump in and maybe give an example of what I feel might be one of the ways how even by engaging in what we think is a positive way, we engage in a negative way, and that would be that we are talking about the threat that Russia is posing to Ukraine, and we are talking less about what it is needed to defeat Russia. So if we talk about the need to defeat Russia and the means to defeat Russia, the perspectives of that, the future of a free Ukraine, then we are creating positive emotions in your sense, we are creating positive reinforcing images, but when we are saying about, oh gosh, Russia, how many tanks do they still have? That is actually engaging in Russia's sense into the discussion, and we do not even get it.
Absolutely. We just end up talking ourselves into a negative bad vibes, basically, which I don't think any of us have the right to do to anyone else, because it's hard enough to stay motivated. So we don't need people bringing other people down who are just trying to do positive things. But I noticed that myself, we can all be a bit like that at times. So that's very much meaning in positive trolling, because to miss the joy is to miss everything. You have to try and find ways of positively inspiring people with our content online and offline.
So I think one of your nice examples. So when I first read your posts or tweets at Decoding Trolls, it was like I stumbled upon many interesting characters, like the chef of Disinfoklore, the chef saucerer, the chief sorcerer, plight of the sorcerer, the magi. So you actually fill your posts with those magical creatures which are actually real persons. So I think everyone gets the chef sorcerer, who has sadly enough deceased right now. But I think it's something you have to smile about when you're reading it, and you still know who is meant with this analogy or with this allegory. So that's really nice, and I think we also should. There are a lot of people who are just engaging in a negative way with negative information and with negative pictures the Russians are sending us. And I think if we engage in that way, we ourselves get stuck in a very negative circle, even if we want to get out the best for Ukraine and the best out for Europe or own personal selves. I don't know why each and every one of us does what he does. But I think this sense of humor shouldn't be lost. And of course, there is misplaced humor. I really despise those videos when someone is dying and people are laughing about it. That's something I think we're going in a very wrong direction there. And you see it all over X or Twitter or social media, and that's a really bad thing. So we should prove ourselves from the negative trolls we self-create, and I think that's, for example, one really negative troll we are creating. And on the other side, we should keep the humor high, and you have this point on the constructing counter disinformation. So do you think, as first of all, you said we should prove it with your code of positive trolls, so we should check it if it's according to these 6 points. But would you say it would be also preferable if there are some meta-narratives that are created by the pro-Ukrainian side or by the West or by Europe that should also trigger those trolls in others? So I think there is Ukraine did a wonderful job of countering Russian propaganda in the first months of the war, but in my opinion, the Ukrainian response is getting much weaker than it was in the beginning. So it lost its novelty, it lost its impact. And should there be some new approach to countering disinformation? So we have this everyday basis, but should there be some strategies to also engage more with these ancient trolls that are lodging in our minds?
Yeah, I think that we can't really criticize in a negative way as outsiders Ukraine's response to.
No, that was no criticism.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I guess from the I haven't really been. I think they're probably still trying to work out how to confront particular arguments which are going out there. But yeah, it is pretty exhausting when the same stuff is coming up again and again. Whether it's about biolabs or 10,000 mercenaries, the same trolls just popping up again and again, and each time they come up, they seem to have a bit more of a feeling of glue, that they're almost a bit, they're more right somehow this time, but they've come out. It is exhausting to see that, but I guess I don't do that. But I think probably the people who do refute these particular kind of fact checking work is really useful. I try to provide some of the underpinnings that would allow us to interpret new data using these algorithms. So I had these characters, the chef saucerer, the chef of Disinfoklore, and so for a month or so I had great characters which were great exemplars of what I call the counter Disinfoklore method, because of course the chef, the Russians using these names like the chef to disguise their propagandists and to give them the character of like fairy tale characters. It's very hard to subvert that without using similar kinds of names. So yeah, so I was very happy with the chef of Disinfoklore and then chief sorcerer, and as someone pointed out, very grateful to learn from that the chef sorcerer became a flying sorcerer at a certain point. Yeah, so there's a lot of wordplay, and I think if we can find some wordplay and clever, funny things like that, we should, because it will help us navigate this kind of quite confusing information space.
So, as you're a keen surveyor of the situation out there regarding Disinfoklore and propaganda, in my opinion, Europe hasn't found a real strategy against Russian propaganda. First of all, because it has still not realized how deeply saturated the European information space is with Russian propaganda, and on the other side, we are even not sure at how to react to it, because I think all those negative trolls Russia is sending out are interfering with creating a new narrative, and we see it all around Europe now, how far-right parties, far-left parties are on the rise, and how dissent is on the rise, and how people actually have a feeling that they are living in bad times, and that's something really, really difficult to come by with. So, how do you see the situation overall right now?
I think, well, I'd encourage anyone to read Counter Disinfoklore. It's up there, the pinned tweet on disinfoklore.net. If you go, you'll get there. Because this is the same game which is being played in our information space that's been going on for a few years now, as you say, trying to use our own emotions to make us feel a bit depressed and that things aren't very positive, and the means by which these people are doing this, but kind of othering us, making us feel threatened by migrants or even by the far right themselves. So using the threat it becomes kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. What I'm trying to get to is help people see, for instance, this right is the attempt to claim what is right. Is this what we call the far right? They keep on popping up in our information space using these same terms, right, and so I've been trying to work out what's going on there in terms of sounds. There's something that is particularly attractive to people about it. Yeah.
I think you singled out two sounds, that the RT sounds, or RT, and MN for mana, and those are two main phrase syllables that you think are quite important for playing games with our minds.
Yeah, well, the RT sound is in there, very, very common. Whether you're talking about Breitbart or Manafort, he's got it both. He's got the MN and the RT in there as well, which it seems like a perfect name for a right-wing ideologue. I don't have any real answers to why there's this sound pattern in here. All I can do is point out that once you start looking at it, it's pretty obvious that there is this pattern. For instance, with the writ, that is used to give people the feeling that they have the right to make laws. For me, what is right is what post-World War II legal order is. So for me, it's about protecting that inheritance, and that those who are claiming the right to forget about the Refugee Convention or laws against discrimination against on the grounds of certain protected grounds, whether it's gender or sex, that those people are trying to they're trying to change our legal order in quite a sly way. And this is what a lot of these far-right protests in all of our European countries are about. And there's too many family resemblances between them in terms of structure, timing, rhetoric, for them not to come from the same source. And so, and I think we can think they're probably coming from Russian and other people trying to stir trouble in our community.
I mean, if you look at it, they have succeeded quite well, because a lot of people out there are thinking that they're entitled to make things right, or to change laws or right, or just ignore something because they think it's not right. So it's getting in the last weeks or months, or since the COVID pandemic, we see more and more blatant, blatant breaks with this post-World War II order, also in the mind of the people. So, as you talked, human rights, European Union, UN Charter, and so on and so on and so on. And that, of course, much of those things weren't observed before, but still, more and more normal people and so people from the streets are feeling entitled to just don't care about them anymore. And I think we are way down a very bad road right now, and we will have a very difficult time to correct that, or to at least save it.
Hello. Isn't what Russia is doing there the usual odd mixture between science, psychology, and mathematics? And you find, I've been in Russia myself in academic circles, and I found this quite prevalent. So I think what Russia is doing is they are trying to deconstruct our rationalist, progressive societies and replace values and established methods, rule of law in our society, with basic myths, just like you had with the Neanderthals. So Russia is basically doing cave paintings on the wall that we are supposed to be afraid of. What the hell is woke? Is woke hindering you when you're going shopping? It is just one of these trolls. It's one of these myths that are trying to make people afraid. So we deconstruct, or people deconstruct, the social boundaries, and our society turns into something similar like the Russian society, something deconstructed where social contract is absent and is taken over by individual flight instincts and fear instincts of individuals.
Yeah, I think you're quite right about that. I mean, to really take down a democratic system, you need to somehow take the trust of the people from this system. So a totalitarian ruler is only, or just a spin dictator, as they are called right now, like Orban or so, that they just become attractive when you have actually disassembled or ruined the trust of the people in the system. And that's what we are seeing all over Europe right now. So a lot of people don't feel that the system, in quotation marks, is serving their needs anymore. And that's a very worrying situation right now, because we are obviously living in some of the best of countries you can be in this world, and still I think we have some of the most discontent populations around right now, and that's a really interesting phenomenon.
So, if I may be so bold, in about 5 minutes we have another troll coming here, and it is the janitor troll. I'm deeply sorry. And first of all, on behalf of all our team, I would like to express my thanks to you, Stephen, and to you, Martin. It was absolutely fantastic, and I hope we can continue this. So please apologize all the disturbances that were there. We are not profis, but we try our best with Martin, brother Martin. I love him to bits, and so we hope that in the future we can do lots of things together to bring society back on track and fight Russian disinformation. But if I may invite you to make closing statements, and thank you so much.
So I think I'll start. So Stephen, thank you very much. It was quite an interesting ride through the magic of Disinfoklore, and I hope the people could get a glimpse of what is possible if you read Decoding Trolls. So I really much appreciated it. I mean, first of all, because I also a linguist somehow, in some way. So that was, but I think that you actually make a very interesting addition to the toolkit of counter disinformation, of counter propaganda, or as counter disinfoklore. And I think you and your theory should get much more attention than you're getting right now. So thank you very much for coming and for waiting with us. And I hope we will talk to each other again in the near future.
And we hope to promote you with Deutsche Welle and some other journalists that have been here today. So let's look forward in the future. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.